Good evening, world. This is Gary Langan, The Art of Noise, and a few other things. You are listening to the Nothing Shocking podcast. Enjoy, and I'm glad you're here.
Want to know what's going on in the world of music? Then tune in to the Nothing Shocking podcast, a non-genre based, all-ages friendly rock and roll program. Join us weekly for interviews with all your favorite rock stars from the mainstream to the underground. You can find us at nothingshocking.libsyn.com or anywhere you download podcasts.
We're putting the band back together.
The numbers all go to 11.
I'm talking about bands that rock. Led Zeppelin. What about Sabbath? AC/DC. Motorhead.
Does that mean it's louder? Isn't it any louder?
Well, it's one louder, isn't it?
We're not worthy. We're not worthy.
Why don't you just make 10 louder and make 10 be the top number and make that a little louder?
These go to 11.
I get up off the ground and raise my head. Days like this, think I should be dead. One for Satan, two for me. Let's cheat the devil, it's fun, don't you agree?
Welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'm your co-host, Jeff Untied, and with me in Dog Bowl Studios is
Coach Nez.
You can find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Libsyn or any podcatchers. Like our Facebook page or follow us on Twitter at No Shock Pod.
You can also find the Nothing Shocking podcast on Rock Rage Radio every Sunday morning at 7 a.m. Central Time. Our sponsor is Ragged Records, located in downtown Rock Island, Illinois, and downtown Davenport, Iowa. We'd like to thank the Hong Kong Sleepover for allowing us to use their music for our intro and bumper ending. Tonight's guest is
Gary Langan.
Yeah, mixer, producer, engineer.
And from The Art of Noise.
Yeah.
Well, this was super exciting for me because we talked a little bit about his early days and his origins at SARM Studios and working with Queen on a couple of their albums. And let's go. This is awesome.
Yeah, let's get right to it. Good night.
Good night.
Gary, welcome to the Nothing Shocking podcast. I'd like to introduce to you my co-host, Jeff Untied.
Gary, thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, Jeff. I'm very happy to be here with you on this Nothing Shocking podcast.
Yeah.
We're very excited to have you. Thank you so much for your correspondence and willing to participate.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's an absolute pleasure.
Well, looks like the COVID mitigations have ended in the United States and over in the UK. Can you talk a little bit about your time during the COVID-19 pandemic and how did you keep yourself busy?
It coincided with me having a couple of major operations.
Oh, wow.
And so I was already on a self-imposed lockdown. So it really didn't change too much for me. All I witnessed was London going to pieces, London being empty. That was the most amazing thing. You could go for a walk and there'd be nothing in the streets. It was quite eerie. And learning how to online shop.
Yeah.
That was my skill set that I learned through the pandemic. Was online shopping. I enjoy going food shopping. It's important for me to go and choose and look at the food I'm going to eat. Yeah. To do it online was a major change for me.
And
so that's how I saw the pandemic. Obviously, there's the dark side of it too, but let's not go there on that one.
Well, absolutely.
Yeah. My personal experience was I was sort of halfway there in terms of lockdown and looking after oneself. So it wasn't such a radical change for me as I think it was for a lot of people.
Did it change your mindset on online grocery shopping? Do you still do it, or do you go back to the store?
Don't go back to the store. I hate the goddamn thing.
My wife wants to continue to online grocery shop, and I'm like, let's go to the store today.
No, I have to go to the store because I enjoy cooking. It's my next love apart from music. First one is music. Second one is cooking and food. And the two are so linked. And people ask me, well, so what do you do? And I say, well, I make music. Like you make food, you make dinner. I make music. I make something. I go to a cupboard. It's called a studio. Yours is called a larder. And I go and choose the ingredients. I think the end result is going to be, and I go and put it together. I think that they're so well linked, the two things.
Yeah, very good.
So going to a shop is like listening to demos. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's get into the music. So
okay,
let's go right into the infancies of your career. You started at SARM Studios at the age of 18. Can you talk about the opportunity that came your way to get this thing all started for you?
Yeah, very quickly, as quick as I can. At the age of 14, I knew what I wanted to do. My father was a musician. My mother was a hairdresser. I had two choices at the age of 14, 13. To earn pocket money was either go and hang out with Dad and carry his violin cases, his woodwind cases and things like that, or go and sweep up hair at my mum's salon. So it was a bit of a no-brainer. And I chose to go with Dad, and I was hanging out in recording studios at the age of 13, 14, 12, 13, 14. And I thought, and I had learnt the piano from the age of 4 or 5 because my father was a musician. Hated the goddamn thing, absolutely hated it. Loved music, but I didn't understand. I didn't know I loved music, but being retrospective, I loved music. I just didn't like the thing of having to learn how to do it and play it. So when I got shown a thing called a recording studio, it was like, well, I want to be this side of the glass, not that side of the glass. And so that happened at 14. At the age of 17, actually 17 and a half, my father was doing a gig in London for a platinum album celebration. He was organised the dinner dance music. And there were two guys from a recording studio. They just happened to be looking for a runner. And I quit college the next day, and the following Monday, that was it. I started in the recording studio.
Nice. Wow, very good.
There's bits in between, obviously, but that's how I got going. So it was through my father, through a chance meeting, a pure happenstance, and that's where I've been for all my life since then.
Yeah.
One way or another, whether it be, in a physical studio or metaphorically in the studio.
Nice.
Yeah. When you first got involved with Queen, I think I read you were a tape operator on a couple songs from Sheer Heart Attack. Can you talk about what involved with the tape operating position?
Okay. You've heard. Here you go. So, job as a tape op on, and the first track I worked on was a track called "Now I'm Here."
Yeah.
And it has lots of delays on the vocals. Now I'm here. Now I'm here. That was my job to make sure that the quarter-inch tape machine that was providing that delay effect was fully loaded with tape at all times. And that machine was a Revox A77, and it was gaffer taped to the top of the console. What else did you do? Well, you went out and got, sandwiches, coffees, cigarettes, and things like that. But basically, that's the main thing I remember. And then, tape. It's difficult to kind of stop talking about it, but tape phasing, or phasing or flanging, as you guys know it today. Yeah. The way that one would achieve that back in the day was using two Revox A77s, and they would be gaffer taped to the top of the console. And I had the job of adjusting the speed of one of the machines against the speed of the other machine using a variometer, and that would produce phasing. They were the first rock band that I ever worked with. There was a bunch of politics as to why I worked with them and why they came to SARM East, because they were working at Trident Studios. But the guy who was engineering from them, a guy called Mike Stone, who was really... I had two mentors when I was growing up in a studio. One of them was Mike Stone. The other one was Gary Lyons. Gary Lyons was the owner of SARM, together with another chap called Barry Ainsworth. And there was a bit of a falling out in the management, and Barry was leaving, and Gary wanted somebody to be a partner in a studio with him, and so he enticed Mike. So with Mike came Queen.
Wow.
So that's how I ended up working with Queen. Again, happenstance, right place, right thing, right place, all that sort of thing.
Well, since we're on the subject of Queen, you were the assistant engineer for A Night at the Opera, A Day at the Races, and News of the World.
Correct, sir.
3 legendary,
iconic
albums. Can you kind of take our listeners back to that time when did you have any idea in your head or in your mind that these albums were going to be such groundbreaking albums that they were?
After Night of the Opera, the answer to that question is yes. Before Night of the Opera, no.
Yeah.
Night of the Opera was make or break for the band. It was the legendary third album. The first 2 had been successful-ish, but the third album had to be the one that launched them, that broke them, as with most bands in those days. You know, that most labels could afford to pay for albums 1 and 2, but album 3 had to be financial payback for them. That's where all the big hits had to be.
Yeah.
And so there was an awful lot of pressure on the band at that point. And it wasn't helped with Freddie writing Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yeah.
Because that really screwed the argument even more. So the question you're going to ask is, did you think that Bohemian Night of the Opera was going to be as big as a... No, of course you didn't. But you knew that you were working on something quite extraordinary. There is that moment of... we haven't got time to go into how Bohemian Rhapsody was constructed, but it was made in 3 bits on the multitrack. There were like 3 different songs. So it really wasn't till the end of the making of that those 3 bits were actually put together, and we would listen from one end to the other for the whole 6 minutes. And I will never forget the moment of standing at the back of the control room, listening to the final mix from one end to the other, the 1/4-inch mix.
Oh, wow.
Because it would have been on 1/4-inch in those days. It wouldn't have been on 1/2-inch.
Well, and the song was so much longer than the average song in the day that it just didn't seem like it would fit.
The arguments that ensued because of the length were endless.
Yeah.
And if it wasn't... there was... I don't know whether you know the story of how it actually got broke here, how it kind of bust out here in the UK, and it was due to a London-based radio station called Capital Radio, and a DJ called Kenny Everett, who was a good friend of Freddie's, and would come and hang out at weekends and things like that. And he came down on the weekend that we finished the final mix, and Kenny turned to Fred and said, "So can I have a cassette to play, for myself?" Freddie said, "Yes, as long as you don't play it out on air," with a wink and a smile.
Yeah.
And it was played out that Sunday afternoon across London. And their switchboard got jammed, and Monday it became a big hit.
Wow.
Yeah, I know. It's so awesome. One of the things that attracted me to Queen was just the very different sounds. That one song could be jazz, the next song's hard rock, the next song's a waltz. In the studio part, when you guys are listening to some of these ideas when they're getting ready to start recording, was it just totally outrageous, or you're like, this is never going to work, or was it just masterpiece? How did it work for you?
I don't think as an assistant, which all I was at that point.
Yeah.
You kind of questioned that. You got to remember that I'm slightly in awe of who I'm working with.
Yeah.
You know, the first time you meet Freddie in your life, it's pretty scary.
Yeah.
You're talking about 1978, and is it 70? Yes, around 78, and there weren't many. You didn't know too many gay guys at that time,
right?
So to come across Freddie, he would wear skin-tight satin black pants with the top button undone and the flies halfway down, and with one hand with his fingernails painted black. And you're a sweet little white boy from Wimbledon, Southwest 19. It was pretty daunting.
Yeah.
So anything that they did, I was very impressed with, basically. I didn't question it. There were a few tracks that you thought, okay, this is not quite the same as the one before. But I was not in a position that I would question it, as I say. It was what they were going to do. And you went with it and supported it.
Yeah, nice.
Very good. I wanted to come back to Mike Stone. And as you said, he was your, I guess, maybe the person that you kind of guided you through the beginnings of your career. Can you kind of talk a little bit more about Mike's work in the studio? And he's obviously revered genius.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about your learnings and teachings from him?
Vocal sounds. Mike taught me how to record vocals. That was his forte. He was incredible in recording vocals. If you can track back through discography, and the vocal sounds on all of the albums that Mike was been involved with were exemplary, were amazing. He taught me so many things. I really, between him and Gary Langan, I don't think I would have enjoyed myself so much in the industry, let's put it that way. I had two wonderful teachers, and out of the two, Mike was the best one. But it was the whole art of, as I said, vocal sounds and being meticulous, being very clean, being very precise, yet remaining artistic. You know, Mike's multi-tracks were in an excellent state. You can't begin to believe how complex trying to make Bohemian Rhapsody was on 24 channels.
Yeah.
It was extraordinary. If you think about the middle part, there are well over 100 voices. They were all that whole operatic section was made on 11 tracks. To extrapolate the maths on that is quite phenomenal.
Yeah.
But to just break off for a section, the way that it was done was that each part was sung 4 times or 3 times, and then that was live bounce. So you'd have 3 channels of your 11 tracks would have the vocal part on it. You'd sing another live part, and at the same time transfer those now 4 channels to another fifth channel, and you kept doing that. So every time you did it, you had 1 channel less. So the first time you did it, you were now down to 10 channels.
Yeah.
Wow.
So to construct that middle bit was quite phenomenal, and that's all Mike's thinking and his planning. And the other thing is that every time you did that bounce of those 4 to 1, you would maybe have 2 other sets of harmonies. So you would have possibly 6 or 8 tracks now going to 1, all right? So the balance of the harmonies had to be right. You couldn't go back and readjust them. the only way of readjusting them was to re-sing them. And you didn't know whether it was going to be right until you'd finished it. It was amazing.
Yeah.
We never went back and did any of those parts again. And that Mike got it right first time. And that's days and days of work. That's like 3-4 days work.
Yeah, and I remember reading that like the other guys in the band really didn't know what the song was, like the parts that they were contributing even were gonna what it was gonna sound like. That they just kept calling it Freddie's thing until the end.
Well, that whole song is Freddie's song.
Yeah.
Nobody knew, but what Roy did, because Roy sat with Fred way before, and Fred would just play it as a piano piece. And go through with Roy what he wanted to do, because Roy was actually there were sort of 6 members to Queen. The other 2 being Roy and Mike.
Yeah,
very good. Can I switch gears on you here?
Go on then.
Yeah, so I kind of wanted to go to the Malcolm McLaren Duck Rock album. You were the engineer for that album, which was basically the introduction to what would become the Art of Noise. Can you talk about the Duck Rock album and the transition to the Art of Noise?
Okay, the Duck Rock album was an experience of going around the world with Malcolm, making an album of world music. By doing that, it showed me so many different genres of music. 1 minute, we're in Tennessee at a place called Tri-State Recording. The next minute, we'd be back in New York. We'd be over in France. So there was a lot of influences, and we had this one magical machine that's helped pull it all together, and that was the Fairlight. And with the Fairlight came this magical guy called JJ, who operated the Fairlight for Trevor. And if he and I had not been involved in Malcolm's album and been able to break, or not rules, but do things that nobody else was doing, like on some of the 12-inch mixes, I would do things that other people weren't doing, in as much that I would do a mix where for the DJs, because I knew I'd seen scratching before anybody had seen it here, because I used to go and hang out with him in these clubs in New York with Malcolm, and that's where we met the world famous Supreme Team, which was in a club one night when they came down from the Bronx with the rest of the crew, with a couple of MCs, a couple of graffiti artists, the girls doing the skipping, all that. That used to, I don't know how old you guys are.
50, yeah.
Well, what used to happen was the clubs used to change over at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and you used to get all these crews come down from the Bronx and set up in a couple of the clubs around town. And one of them was this LGBT club. It wasn't called that in those days, but that's what we're describing it as now. And at about 1 o'clock, that clientele would leave, and this crew would turn up from the Bronx. And part of it would be the world famous Supreme Team. And then what happened was that I found out that they went pickpocketing in Times Square, and the money they made from pickpocketing used to pay for them to do a show on PBS once a week, and recorded it on a cassette off the TV, because the TV in the hotel room was also the radio. And I said to Trevor, I think this is what we base the album around, is these 2 guys. And they go around the world, they find this music. So it was doing mad things like that.
Yeah.
And as I said, the machine called the Fairlight and this great guy called JJ, that combination spawned the Art of Noise.
Amazing.
And how that started was I was working on a Yes album called 90125.
Yep.
And we were on month 8 or 9, I think. Studio number, 12, 13. And they were trying to cut some new tracks, because they didn't have enough tracks for the album. And the way that I'd set the drums up in this room and the tempo of this track that they were cutting made these drums sound absolutely enormous. And they scrapped the track, much to my horror, because as far as I was concerned, it was the best drum sound I'd ever made in my life. It was about to go in the bin.
Yeah.
And because I was just the engineer, I was the only one who knew what was on what tape and how many multi-track tapes we had. So I was supposed to have erased that, but I didn't. I kept it and I stashed it. And then one afternoon when the band went home early, I said to JJ, I've got an idea. And because of what we've been doing with Malcom, I said, I want to push it a few stages further, because we'd started sampling drums and things like that on Malcom's album. We'd started sampling scratching and blah, 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 blah. And I said, what I want to do is I want to put this whole drum kit into the Fairlight. And JJ said, you can't do that. I said, you can. You see, there was something I learned from Malcom. We were having breakfast one morning in Johannesburg, and we were talking, and he always used to call me Boy. He never called me by my name. I was always called Boy. And he said, Boy, people get 2 words wrong and mixed up. And I went, really, Malcom? And he said, can and won't. When somebody says they can't do something, they're actually saying they won't do something. And that stuck with me. So when JJ said we can't do that, I went, well, can't or won't.
Awesome.
Let's give it a go. Let's see what happens.
Awesome.
And so I did a mono mix of these drums, and I stuck it in the back of the Fairlight in the jack socket. And I said to JJ, just hit the sample button whenever. And the Fairlight had 1.5 seconds sample time, and it was an 8-bit sampler. And it had 256K of RAM, and that was as much as you got. So we got 1.5 seconds of these mono drums that then sounded incredible. And we pasted them together. We cut them up and we looped them, which I don't think anybody had started to really do or had tried. And that was the first Art of Noise track.
Oh, that's
fantastic!
Cool. Yeah,
you were a member of the Art of Noise for the first 2 LPs and the EP Into the Battle, Who's Afraid, and Invisible Silence. I guess can you talk a little bit more about the creation of those 3 albums? And it was an avant-garde style of approach to making music, something that maybe we've kind of heard before with Kraftwerk in its infancies, but the Art of Noise took it to a whole nother level. Can you talk a little bit more?
Yeah, the difference between us and Kraftwerk is we had a sense of humor about what we were doing. I don't mean this lightly. I don't mean to belittle us, but we took it very seriously, but also that seriousness had a huge amount of sense of humor. And I think that's what made us stand, and still to this day makes us different to other people who create from sampling. They're too serious about it. There was precision in everything that we did, but there was a big acceptance of a looseness, and the members of the band was a weird juxtaposition of people. The difference between the 3 of us is huge. You know, Anne's just the most beautiful and brilliant musician, pianist, composer. JJ has a degree in geography. I'm a tape op. I'm an assistant, if you like. So the 3 of us, if you'd written that down on paper and said that's going to be a band, you'd say, no way. What are you talking about? It was that humor that we carried, and we still do to this day. I think that sets us apart from other people. It's important. You know, as I say, we do take it seriously, but that we laugh at ourselves. And so making those albums, see, the three of us never had any idea of being in a band. And JJ and myself, we had successful day jobs, if you like. Being in a band was the last thing. It was only because of this one Thursday evening with JJ where we created the demo, if you like, of Close to the Edit.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened was Trevor had a studio band called the Buggles, which had been quite successful here.
Yes.
And that had broken up and dissipated. And now Trevor was being successful in other ways, but sorely missed having his studio band. And we were driving off to a mastering suite one afternoon, and we were in my car, and knowing Trevor really well, I looked across to him and said, "Man, you're looking down. You're not looking great. What's the matter?" And he said, and my nickname from Trevor was Cocky, because that's how I was. That I would try anything and say, "We can do this, Trevor." Yeah. You know, that's why we stuck it out so long. He said, "Cocky, I miss the Buggles. I miss my studio band." And I had a cassette in the glove compartment of this demo that JJ and I had done. And bearing in mind, we had stolen somebody's drums. I'd got Alan White's drums. All right, nicked them, put them into a Fairlight, and made a song out of them. Well, how wrong is that? You know, it's so wrong. And I ummed and ahed, and we were sitting at traffic lights, and I'm umming and ahhing, do I, don't I, do I, don't I? And I said, Trevor, I got to tell you, look, JJ and I goofed around the other evening, and we borrowed a bit of drums from Alan, and look, and I put the cassette in and played him this demo, and he was cocker. He was, you know, had a smile right across his face, and he took that cassette off me and gave it to Chris Blackwell, who was the owner of Island Records, who was at the time setting up a label with Trevor. And Trevor gave it to Chris, and Chris flew just by chance, was flying to New York that afternoon. That night, he played the demo out in Danceteria.
Oh, wow.
And got this incredible reaction off the floor. Came back at the weekend and said to Trevor, "I don't know what this is, who it is, but this is the first band that you signed to ZTT." And that's how we became a band.
Fantastic.
Yeah,
so,
cool.
Trevor basically said that, okay, so you need to do more tracks. So at this point, it's only JJ and I. And then Trevor said, "You know what's missing from this? Is melody." And then he said, "I'm going to get Anne to come down and hang out with you guys." And that was the Art of Noise.
Nice.
Fantastic.
So that's why Anne's nickname is Miss Melody.
Fantastic story.
Well,
because we would just give Anne these crazy tracks made out of a tennis match, ping pong ball, rulers, cars, car engines starting, people shouting, and give them and put all those sounds into a rhythm, into a groove, and then give it to Anne and say, "Put some melody on the top."
It's amazing.
I know.
Well, that's where the sense of humor is. You know, Anne would come, we'd play these tracks to Anne, and her jaw would drop, and we'd just kind of giggle and say, "Just play something, Anne."
My introduction to Art of Noise is probably the song Paranomia with Max Headroom character speaking in there. Can you talk a little bit about the making of that track?
That was, see, we're always open to ideas, and that idea came from, at this point, we'd left ZTT, we're now on China Records, and the guy that owned China Records was Derek Green, who signed the Sex Pistols to A&M, and now had his own label, and he said, "There's this avatar, I guess is what you'd call him now."
Yeah.
His real name is Matt Frewer, but his stage name was Max Headroom.
Yes.
And you obviously know where that name comes from. You see it every day of your life when you drive into a car park.
Yeah.
I wanted to touch upon Art of Noise after the Who's Afraid album, when the Invisible Silence album, you guys moved over to Chrysalis Records. Can you talk a little bit more about why and how that all went down?
That went down. China got absorbed into Chrysalis Records. The China Records were licensed by Chrysalis, so that's how we ended up on Chrysalis. But I'd left the band at this point. I decided that the direction that they were about to go wasn't the way I wanted to go. We'd been offered an American tour, and bearing in mind we'd done one gig, and really technology didn't support something like this playing live. Mm-hmm. You know, the Fairlight wasn't that reliable. Let's be honest now. You know, it was pretty clunky. so hoofing a couple of those around the States, I didn't think was too good an idea, and I never saw the Art of Noise playing to a college audience, a sit-down college audience, and that's what we were being offered. And I wanted to do something completely different, and so I chose to leave them to it. So there's about a year, 2 years where, or possibly, well, that was the last time. I'd left before because I had a row with Jill over the way we were signed to ZTT. But this time, when I left, I kind of left it for good until just recently, because the Art of Noise is kind of been revised in the last 5 years, and JJ and I are now doing quite a few gigs with the revision of the Art of Noise. But what I wanted to do, I could see us doing gigs, but what I wanted to do, having experienced New York with Malcom and things like that, and I knew about the club scene, and Danceteria was still going, and what I wanted to do was, and ENG news cameras had just come on the scene, so that, you know, that was the guy with the camera on his shoulder, with a guy with a little satellite dish trailing behind him that would provide a shortwave link to a truck that would beam it up to satellite, would beam it down to the TV hub station. And I said, well, why don't we do this? Why don't we say the Art of Noise plays New York, and we set up in Danceteria, but we have a couple of ENG trucks at two other clubs on Manhattan somewhere, and we play on the Andy Warhol statement of everybody should be famous for 15 minutes of their life.
Yeah.
And I said, well, look, we don't have any lead singers and we don't have any lead guitarists, so why don't we use these ENG guys to go and film the audience or the clients in another club, and we have a VJ at Danceteria taking back all this data, and he does a live video cut and beams that out, and we can play loads of clubs in New York, and we make the audience a star. Cool. Yeah. And I said, we do that in New York, and we only do it for one night, and then we go to Chicago, then we go to San Francisco, maybe Seattle, and that's it. And we've done America, and everybody's going, you can't do that. Wrong words to say to me.
Yeah.
No, you're saying you won't do that, so I'm off out of here.
Oh, very good.
Yeah. And they went and did a college tour, and it was okay. less said about that, the better.
Well, let's go back to the your revision here, and kind of getting back with the band the last couple of years. Upcoming, you guys got a tour coming of UK, Europe, and Japan.
Well, we're not going to tour. We won't have a tour. We're always going to play iconic venues. Things like the British Library here in London. We played at the Jazz Cafe, which is a really old rock jazz club. From I don't know when it first started, 60s, 70s. And so we did a couple of gigs there. There's a couple of venues in Tokyo and Yokohama in Japan that we've played at. And there's a couple of festivals here that we do. And it's about that now there is technology there that allows us to do what we did originally, but now push it even further.
Oh yeah.
And there's a continuous love for the 80s music. What can I say? People won't let go of it. We're not short. I'm not bigging us up, but we're not short of offers to do gigs, because we're going to turn up. We're going to give you something that you really haven't heard since the 80s, because we haven't been out there doing it. And a lot of the 80s bands have been going and playing out live for quite a few years.
Yes. Yeah.
But because, again, we were hampered by technology, I'm far too old to have loads of flight cases of gear. I kind of made a little pact with myself about, let's say 5-6 years ago, that I was going to restart or get the band, or at least JJ and I. Well, we did some gigs with Anne in the beginning of this little foray, but what I didn't want was loads of gear. I've built studios, I've done gear, I've done tours, I've done gear. I don't want my own gear. So the criteria was that it has to go in a rucksack. I'll only do a gig if I can put it in a rucksack.
Yeah.
And which is sort of where we're at now. All right, it's a little bit bigger than a rucksack, but it's pretty small.
Yeah.
And that was one of the major things. But technology allows me to do that, obviously. The music software now is quite phenomenal. It goes at such a pace. I can't keep up with it.
Oh, very good.
I really can't. And I have to say, I don't know how these youngsters sit in front of a screen all day long.
I know.
I do, because they come from a gaming world, blah, blah, blah. So it's a sort of a learned behavior. But it's one of the reasons why I had to break out and leave studio world, because I wasn't getting any joy anymore. The joy for me in making music is, like I said, it's cooking. I want lots of tasty ingredients. And to me, those are musicians. They're not algorithms.
Right.
I don't see algorithms as tasty morsels.
Well, we agree with you.
Absolutely. Gary, we're out of our allotted time for the evening. Is there anything that we left off that you would like to plug or promote?
Come and see the band. No. I think we've done very well in the time allotted.
Yeah, absolutely. We want to thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
This is how it's going to work out. Jeff, the editing wizard over here, will get this all cleaned up for us and have it ready for listening in about 3 weeks, and I'll send the link to you immediately, and please share it wherever you can.
Of course. I'll put it on the band's socials.
Oh, fantastic.
I don't do that. I've got somebody who does.
Gary, thank you so much for your time.
Really appreciate it.
Okay, pleasure, guys.
Have a good one.
Okay, bye now.
Bye-bye.
breaks the stone and makes their own mistakes. Hide in the headlights, fight the grip of fear. You can make your dreams come true, but you just can't do it here. Hey. Everybody eyes the gun and screams inside their head. Everybody bites their tongue and pays their bills instead. Hide in the spotlights, fight the grip of death. You can have the air you need, but you best not take one breath. Hey. Roll the dice. Take your chances. Everybody knows the game is fixed, there is no prize. Everybody pulls the plug and says their last goodbyes. Move to the sunshine, fight the grip of nights. If they ever